Wasabi guys, welcome back to another 10 underrated commander cards video. This is a series I'm starting to do once a month where I go over 10 lesser known commander cards, and sometimes there's a theme, sometimes it's just 10 random cards, but for this video I will have a focus on Modern Horizons 1 and 2. But before I start the video, first I would like to remind you that most of you who are watching right now are not actually subscribed to the channel, so I would really appreciate it if you took a second to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. First card I want to talk about here is Vesper Lark from the first Modern Horizons, a 3-mana 2/1 white elemental flying creature. When it leaves the battlefield, return target creature card with power 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield and an evoke cost of 2, which means you can pay only 2 mana to have it enter the battlefield, but you sacrifice it, so you end up getting that trigger for when it leaves the battlefield. You just won't be able to have it stick around. So that's a really cool way that you can synergize with some commander options like Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle, or just any black-white aristocrat strategy where you have a lot of other smaller creatures. It was created, I'm assuming, because it's one half of a Lark, so for paying less mana, you get the same kind of ability, but instead of 2 creatures, you only get 1 and it's power 1 or less. I still think that's worth it, especially if you are playing something like a Teshar deck because you have a lot of artifacts you can play and then easily get Vesper Lark back. This could be part of some loops there where you end up getting other tiny creatures back. If you have any kind of sack outlet like an Ashnod's Altar, that can get out of hand pretty quickly. The next card here is from the new Modern Horizons set, Search the Premises, a 4-mana white enchantment. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, you investigate, which means you create a clue artifact token that you can pay 2 mana and sacrifice to draw a card. Now this isn't going to keep your opponents from attacking you, which I think is why a lot of people are ignoring it to start out with when we're looking at Modern Horizons 2. But I think it has a ton of potential. We don't even have to really pay attention to clues and drawing cards, just the idea of getting a ton of those tokens if your opponents want to attack you. If you have a token doubler like an Anointed Procession, you're going to get twice those tokens. In any kind of artifact strategy or token strategy where just getting numbers out there is important, this is really going to help you out defensively. I don't think we have a ton of defensive cards that really support a token strategy. And oh yeah, you can always sacrifice those tokens for 2 mana to draw a card, which is never a bad thing. I think clue artifacts are quite underrated because they're not like treasures. You don't just sacrifice them for immediate value. You do have to pay mana to draw cards. And the next card we have here is from Modern Horizons 1, Watcher for Tomorrow. I believe I've talked about some of these cards before being underrated, but I'm not sure if I've talked about this one before. 2 mana 2/1 human wizard with Hideaway, so it enters the battlefield tapped, and when it does, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, you exile one of them face down, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library, and when Watcher for Tomorrow leaves the battlefield, put the exiled card into its owner's hand. So if you have any kind of blink strategy, which is pretty common, pretty easy to do in blue, you should be able to have Watcher for Tomorrow enter, trigger the Hideaway, and then have it leave so you get the other trigger, and then you put that exiled card into your hand. Doing this repeatedly is arguably better than just having a creature enter the battlefield and draw you a couple cards, because it means you're going 4 deep and you're getting 1 card that you want out of those 4. So you're going through your deck even quicker, and even if you don't have a blink strategy, it's still nice to have a good blocker out there. You know, if you have this creature out there and it has an exiled card with it, your opponents maybe won't attack you just out of fear of what you might get to your hand. And it doesn't matter how it leaves the battlefield, it could be exiled, it could be destroyed, bounced back to your hand, you will get the card. The next card here is another one from Modern Horizons 1, Endling. I think any of these Morphling wannabe creatures, they're all pretty good. They have several activated abilities, that's the theme of them. And you'll have Endling, you'll have Aetherling, you'll have Brightling. There are a ton of these creatures. And I think the potential is actually beyond just having these cool abilities or just being a zombie shapeshifter or whatever. It's actually being able to synergize with any future commanders that happen to be more like Marcel the Pretender. That was really the commander that made something like Endling, that made something like Aetherling more viable, because if you give your commander all those different abilities, it's just so much harder to deal with Marcel. So if we ever get another commander that synergizes with several activated abilities, like that, again, something like Endling, which is dirt cheap now. I don't think anybody cares about Endling. It has a high ceiling, I think. So these abilities, you can have it gain Menace until end of turn, Death Touch until end of turn, Undying until end of turn, which is nice because you could fool around with those synergies and remove +1/+1 counters so that it keeps coming back. Or you could have it get +1/-1 or -1/+1 until end of turn. so all of those abilities are great combat focused too, and it also has some way of giving itself, not protection, but it's more resilient. It can come back with the Undying. And then we have Violent Tumor from Modern Horizons 2. It's a 4-mana 2/2 black zombie warlock with Death Touch. It enters a battlefield, search your library for a card, put that card into your graveyard, then shuffle. So that's it, it's an Entomb on an ETB. Some of these cards, I have to be honest, from Modern Horizons 2, it's not that I don't think these are going to see play, it's just I don't see a lot of people talking about them yet. But having Entomb on an ETB is pretty good. We had Auric Loremaster from Strixhaven, which is Entomb on an activated ability that you can keep using over and over again. This being on an ETB, I think is even better, because you can of course abuse it. You can do that immediately, you don't need a haste enabler. You just don't have that same repeated value with activated abilities. You would have to sacrifice it, bring it back from the graveyard, and get that trigger all over again. I think it might be better because it's the same cost as Auric Loremaster, and you get that pretty much immediately. And you get a good creature here with Death Touch, so at the uncommon level, the fact that you can also synergize with zombies, Violent Tumor is going to see play in Commander. I just don't think a lot of people have talked about it yet. And then next we have Aria of Flame from Modern Horizons 1. This is such a weird card in red because I think a lot of people, they don't like giving your opponents life, but we have just some crazy synergies when it comes to Storm. And especially in the Commander format, when you can copy so many of your instants and sorceries, and when you're able to just go off and cast the same cantrips over and over again, this isn't really that big of a deal because you're just going to get so many counters on this. But let me read the second part here, before I get too ahead of myself. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you put a verse counter on Aria of Flame, then it deals damage equal to the number of verse counters on it to target player or planeswalker. So for just a 3-mana enchantment, every time you cast an instant or sorcery, you're just going to keep adding counters to that. So 1 means you're only dealing 1, 2 means you're going to deal 2, 3 means you're going to deal 3 to a target, and then 4, 5, and 6, it starts to add up, you know? And while you can only deal that to one target at a time, it's not long before you've overcome that 10 life that you gave them. So it is kind of an uphill climb, this card is, but I think it's interesting enough, especially in red. It is pretty well balanced for what it does. If you didn't give them 10 life, that would be ridiculous. The next card is another red enchantment from Modern Horizons 1, Tectonic Reformation. So 2-mana red enchantment, each land in your hand has a cycling cost of 1 red, and the card itself here has a cycling cost of 2, so you pay 2, discard it to draw a card. Each of your lands having that same ability for only 1 red is not just good for land strategies, if you end up getting a lot of lands to your hand, and you don't want them in your hand anymore if you want to play something like Lord Windgrace, you can easily just dump them from your hand to draw a card until you get to something that isn't a land. Even outside of those land strategies, I still think you would want to play something like this in red. I think the problem with red is that you don't have enough ramp. You only really have ramp and artifact sources. You don't really have a lot of cards that just get you mountains. So you're either in a situation where you have not enough mountains or you have too many. So this is really good if you're faced with the latter, but no doubt stronger in landfall strategies. And then we have a newer card here from Modern Horizons 2, Scurry Oak. A 3-mana green tree folk, 1/2 with Evolve, so whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, if it has a power or toughness greater than it, Scurry Oak gets a +1/+1 counter, and whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on Scurry Oak, we get to create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So I think this is brilliant because it does combo, right? It combos in the same way that you would combo with Gave Guru of Spores, but you don't have the activated ability on the creature itself to remove counters and create tokens. You kind of have to figure that part out on your own, but every time it gets a counter, you get a squirrel. If you have any way of removing counters or adding counters at will, you have a pretty good source of getting more squirrel tokens. Using something like a Cather's Crusade, you could just go infinite, create a ton of creatures, get more +1/+1 counters. It's pretty ridiculous. And the next card here from Modern Horizons 1 is Unbound Flourishing, another 3-mana card here in green, but it's an enchantment. Whenever you cast a permanent spell with a mana cost that contains X, you double the value of X. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell or activate an ability, if that spell's mana cost or that ability's activation cost contains X, you copy that spell or ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. I don't know if this is so much underrated. I just think any kind of X-costed strategy going back to Roshi and Mandarer, but this is still an affordable card here. I think it's only around $6. But what it does, it's essentially the doubling season for X costs. So you get just an insane value off of those commanders. any kind of commander option that benefits off of X costs or spells that benefit off of X costs. And whenever you're playing something like a Villainous Wealth, you get to copy that spell, get to choose new targets for that, and that's even more powerful. I just think for being the doubling season of X costs, this card has a crazy high ceiling that I don't think it's really looked into right now, but I think a lot of people will be kicking themselves if they don't go and pick up this one right now, while they can. So the next card here is Unsettled Mariner from Modern Horizons 1. White-blue, 2 mana, 2/2 shapeshifter, a changeling too, so it's any creature type. Whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. This is always kind of one of those cards I look at and I think to myself, this could easily see play in competitive EDH, depending on what the strategy is. If there is a tribal focus in competitive EDH, I think Unsettled Mariner should definitely see more play, and especially once it becomes more competitive, every mana counts. I mean, every mana counts in competitive play. You have so many turn 1 spells, you have so many spells that you can cast turn 0. Getting this out there sooner just means that you're going to stop so many removal spells, you're going to stop so many different spells that are going to target you. And even outside of competitive play, I just think it's great whenever you have almost like a ward ability where you are giving a small line of protection. It's not going to be too much for your opponents to overcome, but just the inconvenience of having to pay 1 more mana whenever they want to target your things or target you, I think has always been nice, and I don't think it sees enough play. So let me know what you think about these 10 underrated commander cards from the Modern Horizons. Leave a comment in the comment section below, like, subscribe, share, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Void here signing off. Have a wonderful day.